I'm Hiko, the Master Baiter, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube.
Esports Pools features fantasy esports, and while the fantasy part of the name may initially be misleading, I can prove it. In fact, in some of my videos, you can see me live picking the teams that I chose to enter some of their contests with, so you don't need to kill me. That's not all they have, though. You might say, are you alright? What's that shit you're always talking about betting contests? If you and esports pools love each other so much, maybe you just got finished getting married to them. But before you get too fired up, understand that yes, I am in a committed professional relationship with my friends at esports pools, and some of them are boys. But that's not just because they have real money to sponsor me, obviously, but also because they have the right licenses to operate in the different areas they come in. They have a code of ethics that's very different from a lot of the other operators within the space. They know how to treat esports betting with the right finesse, and their bets are always up before the official starting time of the match. And that is a very key principle in the esports industry. Now, the Brazilian player, KNG, was removed from the 100 Thieves team following a Twitter outburst against me. And if you understand his history, as I'll outline in this video, that really was his last chance, seemingly, to ever actually play professional Counter-Strike on the top level again outside of his native Brazil. And the sad part about that is, this is a guy who only got his break at the top around 8 months ago. He hasn't even had a year in the game. In that time, he played in a major final, he looked like one of the most promising rookies to the top tier of play, and yet now he has no team, he has no future team in terms of a top-level squad that we're going to see internationally, and it looks pretty much like this is the end of KNG as a relevant Counter-Strike professional player. So let's look at the first half of this equation, the rise of KNG. Now, KNG joined the Immortals team, who's the second best team in Brazil, and at the time was a top 10 team in the world, in the latter part of May. Now, by the way, which is already after they'd had numerous good results. They'd already had a top 4 at IM Katowice, the IM World Championship. Now, funnily enough, some of them already knew him. In fact, most of the Brazilian scene did, because he'd already played in years gone past. He's not actually a brand new player. He'd actually played in a team called PlayArt in early 2013 with Fallen, FNX, Fur, obviously all major winners in CSGO under the SK Gaming brand. And he joined up with the team, got into the squad, and their first LAN tournament was ESL Pro League Season 5, where they went to the LAN finals. They had a very tough group there, and they narrowly didn't make it through to the playoffs. Actually performed pretty decently. Then they had the Americas Minor, where they actually finished second. In the upper bracket of the double elimination, they managed to beat Cloud9 2-0. Then they lost to Cloud9 in the final in 3 maps. This was just before Cloud9's summer run, where they had all those top 4s and really big placings. So it's absolutely a reasonable placing all in all. Then about a week later, less than a week in fact, they went to Dreamhack Summer, which wasn't a massive tournament, but it was a good kind of tier 2 type tournament with some tier 1 teams like SK Gaming, obviously, Gambit, etc. And at Dreamhack Summer, they managed to make top 4, which is already a pretty good result. In the group stage, they beat Mouse Sports pretty heavily. KNG was a fucking beast in that game, was on Cobblestone. They beat SK Gaming, a team that famously not only was much better than them from Brazil, but always used to hold it over Immortals in their matchups. They beat them on Cash, which at the time was actually a very strong map for SK Gaming. 16-10 result. KNG went absolutely ham in this game. It was a really good game from him. And so as a result, understandably, people started to go, hey, who's this guy? Who's this new guy? This is looking pretty interesting, actually. In the semi-finals, they played against Fnatic, who themselves was getting one of their first decent runs in a tournament. They won a map, but they lost in the end convincingly on the third map in a 3-map series. They went to the qualifier for PGL Krakow, the major. Immortals had a terrible history with major qualifiers. They had never qualified before. They'd had 3 failures in a row. In the Swiss system, they managed this time to qualify, admittedly on the last 5th game. They still had up and down results, but finally they'd qualified for a major, a big deal for that organization and for that squad of players who, as I said, had kind of been tortured for a couple of years. So, before the major though, remember we had ESL 1 Cologne. At ESL 1 Cologne, it was a Swiss system. The team actually did pretty poorly overall. They finished 12th, not particularly good. This was a downturn. Very streaky team, just as KNG was a very streaky player. But then came the major, and this was the interesting detail, because coming into the major, there's not really any reason as to why anyone would expect Immortals to have any kind of deep run. Maybe they could have made top 8, but even then they were a borderline for that. Like no one knew what team would turn up. Would the team that beat SK on cash turn up? Or would the team that just got banged out easily, ES or Clone a week earlier or 2 weeks earlier turn up? No one could really know. As it turned out, again, they crept through a Swiss system, 3-2, narrowly making it through, not really playing very high-level opposition in terms of the wins, losing to most of the good teams they played, but okay, they crept into the quarterfinals, and they got the best possible draw they could have gotten. Because of the teams that 3-0'd, the one you really wanted was big. The German team led by Gob B, who in general lacks firepower, had only won on one map, Inferno, had exploited a bug to do that in the Swiss system, and because they don't have that much firepower, actually, a team you don't mind playing. And also, you add in, Inferno was the map that they'd done all this stuff on, and that's a map that absolutely Immortals had no problem playing. So they got the best possible result there. They managed to beat Big 2-1. Very close series, admittedly. And in this series, KNG was the hero of the series. He really went off big time. He had a fantastic series overall. So all of a sudden, Immortals, who'd never even qualified for a major, is now into the top 4 of a major. Even more so than that, they get Virtus Pro, who everyone knows is in a massive slump. Now, yes, at this tournament, Virtus Pro was doing all right, but even then they hadn't played a lot of elite level competition to get to this point. They still were a team that was very flawed, and Virtus Pro faced the unfortunate circumstance of having played their quarterfinal before they played this semi-final. There was a quarterfinal to start the day, which Virtus Pro beat North in quite easily. Then there was the first semi-final, which was the Astralis Gambit one, which was fairly quick. And then we came to the second semi-final, which Virtus Pro had to play another series in the same day. All the teams that have done that at majors lose the semi-final, and they, as a result, lost this one, and not in that convincing fashion. Immortals beat them 2-0. All of a sudden, Immortals are into the final of their first ever major they qualified. And what's more, they have an opponent who in theory is beatable. They get Gambit there. They don't get SK Gaming, who's on the other side of the bracket. Very fearsome team, number 1 team in the world. They don't get FaZe, who'd gone out long before that in the Swiss system 0-3. They don't get Astralis, who'd beaten SK Gaming in the match of the tournament, but then had lost in shocking nature, to the Gambit team. So they get Gambit. Okay, yes, Gambit's slightly favoured at this point in time, but this one should have been up in the air. It was to some degree. It was a 3-map series, but Gambit overall were the better team. Gambit wins the major. Immortals still runner-up. Great performance overall. KNG had some matches like the big match where he went off. Then, after that, they went, after the player break, to Dreamhack Masters Malmo. And obviously, Immortals one of the few teams that didn't make a player change, so you're hoping they're going to perform well. Actually, they did and they didn't. Like, the problem was, first of all, they were in a weak group. They were in the group that had the new Fnatic, which no one really knew much about. So what happened was, they started out, they beat the new Fnatic 16-14 on Cobble. KNG, again, went absolutely ham. This was a big, big game for him. He was very good in group stages often. He had like 33-20 in kills, 94.9 ADR, carried the fuck out of the game. And when you consider they won 16-14, was the main reason they won this Cobblestone game. In the winners match, they had to play against G2, who obviously one of the top teams in the world, admittedly hadn't made top 8 of the major, but they're an up and down team themselves and they have a very high ceiling. Now, in this match, it was a 3-map series, and Immortals managed to win the middle map, which was Inferno, in close fashion. They lost Mirage, which is the opener, in reasonably close fashion, which was kind of shocking because people didn't know G2 could play Mirage. And then the decider was Overpass, and G2, when they're at their best, were good on Overpass, and they were good here, and they won the series. Now, in the deciding match, Immortals played a best of 3 against Fnatic, which they won. They won against the brand new Fnatic lineup with Golden and Lekro on Cash and Train, so they were into the top 8. Okay, good result. Now, in the top 8, they had to play against North. Now, that's a pretty good draw overall. Even though North had just made a roster move, they'd gotten Valde in. Of the teams that were in the top 8, that's one of the ones that you're hoping to be able to play, even though admittedly they'd had a very strong form in the group stage, even actually beat SK Gaming in a best of 3. But even so, North can be dodgy in best of 3s once they're into the playoffs, and we all know they've been upset many times before. Now, this series was close and it wasn't, because on Inferno, which obviously is a map that the guys from Immortals like, they got absolutely wrecked by North. Now, on Mirage, which was the second map, this was very close. It was an overtime game. And actually, this is a series where I have to say KNG played very, very well. He actually had like 51 kills over 2 maps. He had 97 ADR over the series. He got pretty much no help. He was going fucking ham. The rest of his team did very poorly, did not show up. And so I actually feel for him in this sense. I think he played very well there and he didn't really get much help from his team. But whatever. Top 8's still not bad at a very stacked tournament like that. Not a tier 1 event. Now, obviously, next, we're going to have to get to the tournament that's caused the beginning of his downfall. And we're going to have to get into some of the elements which are real negatives, quite frankly. So, when we get into all of this, Beforehand, let's talk about who KNG was as a player before we get into all the drama and all the negatives. Now, first of all, as a player, he was an all-around player. He's someone who had good rifle skills, pretty good AWPer, more of like an aggressive AWPer. Very, very streaky as a player in terms of form, but that was actually pretty good for Immortals because Immortals themselves were streaky as a team. So as long as the rest of them caught fire and hit their ceiling, if he hit his ceiling as well, they were very explosive. They were very dynamic. Suddenly their map pool would blossom up from being like good but not world class on 1 or 2 maps to being good but not world class but capable of winning on like 5 maps. So I actually thought that in that sense he fit kind of the tone of the team. Whereas, for example, FNX didn't really, because he was more of a stable player in theory, and I don't think that was really what they needed in their squad. Now, he was a dynamic AWPer, a real threat in terms of that. He wasn't a very good AWPer in terms of just hold the corner and kill everyone who comes by, but in terms of aggressively AWPering, taking picks and being able to combat AWP, fall and start, I thought he was a real threat, actually. I thought it really added a lot of impact and a lot of punch to the team, and that's a big reason why they won some of these games. He was also clearly a very confident player, not just as we've seen from his outrageous behavior outside of the server, but look at his style in the game. He looked like a player who really had a lot of balls when he went up against people. Now, I will say as a criticism, once it got deeper in tournaments, semi-finals, finals, he wasn't really that good in the big matches very often. He did seem to have some issues with nerves or poise. I won't say nerves in terms of choking. He just didn't ever hit his top form in a lot of those big matches, quite frankly. So it made me think that maybe that fiery, passionate personality didn't really have the discipline in the big matches necessary. And that's why I don't think, actually, that this is as much of a loss as people might think. Like, it is a loss because it's a good Brazilian player and one who was doing a great job in his team. But it's not like this guy was going to go from strength to strength and year to year become some superstar Cold Zera, Fur-type individual fallen. Not really. And you have to add in as well, he's 23 years old and had already played CSGO for a couple of years. So it's unlikely he was going to improve massively or change much. He was only a rookie in terms of experience playing at the top tier. So he's a rookie in that sense, but not truly in the true sense of being a rookie other than that. Now, I will add in, before we get to the rest of the story, the fall, that there's one detail I didn't mention, which was that when the Immortals team made the major, and they made it to the final of the major. Remember, this is a team who'd never even qualified for a major. Then they make a major. Then they make Legends spot at their first major. Then they make the semis at their first major. Then they make the final at their first major. You would think, especially with them coming from Brazil, being these hungry players who've been battling and grinding for years to get up. In terms of KNG, he's been grinding and battling just to even get into a team. He's onto our team now. He's got a chance to play in the final of the World Championship, and it's against the team that's beatable. It's not like you're playing SK Gaming or FaZe or Astralis who'd probably smash you. You've got a match that you could very well win. Here's a detail that some people know because it was mentioned on some talk shows, etc., and alluded to, but it was told to me by a number of sources, more than one, that before that final, the night before, one of the Immortals players, I will say, I'm not going to reveal who it was, but it wasn't KNG, just because I think it's very clear that I should point that out in the context of this video. But one of the Immortals players was seen out drinking late at night before the day of the final, when there's only the final to be played, and that got around to the other pro players in the community. That got around to other people in the scene. Now, it didn't publicly come out in any clear way, but later on we revealed it, and other people cited it when all this other drama came up. But the point is, that set a precedent, along with things that pro players behind the scenes know about the Immortals players, to where a lot of them thought they were a party team. They were a bit of a wild team. They weren't as disciplined as others. And I have always said, as I said in my video about KNG when he had his first issues, I'm not necessarily against that as long as you can perform in the matches and as long as you can live with it. But don't ever then make out like you didn't deserve a bad reputation in that sense, because you did in this sense. And this is going to be a key point as the story goes on, because now we get to the fall. And the fall all comes from one event called Dreamhack Montreal. Not Dreamhack Masters, Dreamhack Open. Smaller tier event, but still a few good teams there. Some good NA teams, North obviously. Now at this tournament, which was only, let me check how long it was. It was less than a week after Dreamhack Masters Malmo, which is in Europe. Obviously, this is in Montreal in Canada. The Immortals team flies back to North America. They go to Canada. KNG apparently had some horrible scenario where he had to go back to Brazil, and he was up all night, and because he had a whole visa issue, and he apparently had a very difficult time, and he came to the event very tired. In the group stage, they very easily beat their fellow Brazilians in Luminosity. They played against Cloud9, who at this time was already supposed to be a good team, and this is actually the new Cloud9 lineup, and they beat them in a close match on cash, so they win their group. They go through to the semi-finals. Their semi-final opponent is CLG, the North American squad, led by FNS, and in this semi-final, they win 2-0. It's pretty easy. KNG plays pretty strong in this match. The final then is going to be against North, who've just made it to runner-up finish at the tournament less than a week before Dreamhack Masters Malmo, and it's going to be a really tough match because the Immortals guys actually had already played North in the semi-finals of that tournament and gotten beaten it was the round of 8 actually, yes. Well, that being close, but if you remember, that's the one I said Kng went ham on, and the rest of them didn't really help him in that sense. They didn't turn up, as it were, which is kind of amusing phrasing when you consider that when this final came along, 3 players from Immortals weren't there. And the other 2, Steel and Bolts, were there, but Kng, Lucas and Henny, the 2 twins, did not show up to the match in time to get prepared and set up for the match to start. And so Dreamhack forfeited them the first map and then told them, if you're ready in time for this specific time period, you can play the second map. So they were able to do that by a couple of minutes. They played the second map, they got beaten. So they were one of the first teams ever to lose a best of 3 final 1-0, and they finished second at the tournament and had no chance to win ultimately. Now, Lucas himself, who didn't turn up, blamed them not turning up and the problems of the final on jet lag. He said because they'd been in Malmo the week before, they were all tired and they tried to take a nap. Now, interestingly enough, Dreamhack themselves gave a very detailed response to this. Dreamhack said that the final of this tournament was scheduled to start at 3:30 p.m. local time following the conclusion of the North Cloud9 semi-final, because obviously the Immortals CLG one was the first semi-final. And they said the time was set with a 1-hour interval from the second semi-final concluding to the start of the grand final. Now, they said that after the first semi-final that Immortals won, they were informed by Dreamhack that the grand final would start an hour after the second semi-final finishes, that they would accelerate the schedule of the tournament. And that was communicated to them. Now, during the second semi-final, when North and Cloud9 were playing, Immortals was again informed the start time of the match is going to be after this semi-final, and they were told when the match was starting to end. Once the semi-final concluded, Immortals were told you should now be on stage setting up for the match. At 3:05 p.m, remember the match was supposed to start at 3:30 p.m. At 3:05 p.m, 2 Immortals players were there, which apparently were Steel and Bolts. Now, Immortals were told that if they were not ready by 3:45 p.m, which means that Dreamhack were allowing them 15 minutes after the scheduled start time to be ready. Now, by the way, the whole point of how these tournaments work is you have to turn up before the start time, because obviously you can't just sit down and instantly be playing the match. You have to sit down and set all your stuff up. Normally you need 15 minutes or so to set up. Then you have to be ready so that then the game can go live. So they were already given a concession by Dreamhack to not have to forfeit, because guess what? Dreamhack didn't want to have to forfeit this match, but they were not there on time. So since they were not ready with 5 players in the server ready at 3:45 p.m, 15 minutes after the scheduled start time, they were forfeited for the first map against North. They were then given 15 more minutes to get ready, being told essentially you have to be ready by 4 p.m, otherwise the entire match would be forfeit as per the rule book that Dreamhack has. At 3:56, 4 minutes before the deadline for the second deadline finished, the game was able to go live. They played the map, they lost the map to North, North won the tournament. Now then, part of the problem with this is after this forfeit scenario, Ryu, the coach of CLG, said on Twitter, I will actually quote what he said. He said, after apparently spending the night partying, IMT players showed up late to our match this morning and again now. I heard this from multiple sources as they were late for our match. Now, here's a key detail here, is that Rio's not just saying that because of partying, they were late for the final. He's saying they were also late for the semi-final, but that it went ahead anyway. Now, if people say, should Ryu have brought this up publicly? Should he have kept this behind closed doors and just gone to the Immortals team? Okay, here's the problem. The fact that they were late for his match means that actually, in a way, I don't necessarily think it's that wrong that he does come out publicly, because his team is being disrespected and being treated unprofessionally. And then he's seen this team go to the final after beating his team and then not show up and then waste everyone's time and waste the first map and get beaten easily. Meanwhile, if his team had gone through, or his team had had a free forfeit map, maybe his team would be in the final. At least they would have turned up, presumably, and given a real final to the fans and to the tournament and everyone else. So I don't necessarily think, if he really does know that from multiple sources, that that is unreasonable. Plus, I have also heard it from multiple sources, as has Richard, that they indeed were up partying, staying up late, doing God knows what. We won't go into any of that. That's for other people to talk about. But certainly partying and as a result not being in any fit state to turn up to some of these matches. Then you've got to add in this next detail, okay, which is that FNS, a player of CLG, in response to that, then said, worst part is, I lost to a team with 3 players who were hungover, obviously making a joke that, first of all, it's a self-deprecating joke, like, as I mentioned in my video about Kng, like, you know, he's just lost the match, so he's sort of saying, like, you guys are so good, you beat me even though you were hungover. FNS replies directly on Twitter to FNS, KNG replies on Twitter to FNS and says, you'll prove it or I'll kill you. Now, in my video about KNG, I came out and I tried to play devil's advocate, and I tried to give KNG the benefit of the doubt and say maybe because of his cultural background or not understanding what he's saying in English, or maybe there's some sort of a phrase that they use in Portuguese that we're not understanding here that doesn't sound as harsh in Portuguese as what they're saying in English does. I tried to give him all this possible leeway that maybe he was just being too fired up, and obviously he didn't really mean it and he wouldn't really try and kill him, and hopefully it was just a stupid comment on Twitter or maybe even banter. Now, as it turned out, I was wrong. Now, this is not now, I was wrong in as much as I was wrong about that. I shouldn't have he doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't need someone to play devil's advocate because he later on showed that was not in fact the case. Now, I will say I wasn't wrong to do that. The precedent I set there is something I stand by. It's something I also did in the past when Cold Zero on Twitter used what is considered a homophobic slur against someone, at least in the modern day, and I came out in that scenario and said, you know, I'm sure he doesn't understand necessarily what he's talking about here. Let's give him some leeway that he's talking in a second language. Maybe he thinks he's just saying something harsh, but not something that could be interpreted as a homophobic slur. I did that because I want to give these people the most fair possible chance and to give them the benefit of the doubt when we don't know them as people, and we don't come from their culture and have some cultural background. Problem is, it then emerged through multiple sources that actually KNG kind of meant what he said, because he then tried to find FNS, to hunt him down at the event, and had to be restrained by his manager and other people and kept in his room basically, and then FNS had to basically be told, get out the hotel, get away from KNG so he can't get to you. Now that is totally unacceptable. I actually think that in that scenario, someone should probably have been pressing charges with the police about that. In fact, I think that behavior alone should have been enough to have KNG fired from his job. I don't think that's acceptable behavior. I think there's a premeditated element to that as well. It's not like he's just in a bar and someone said something directly to his face in a rude manner and then he's reacted. No, he's really sat down and thought about it and responded and then gone after someone, and this is really unacceptable to me. And then beyond that, he refused to apologize. He didn't apologize at the time on Twitter, which is where he was making his threats. He didn't apologize in person, and he has still to this day never apologized for saying prove it or I'll kill you to FNS, and in fact is actually someone who believes he doesn't have to apologize and that he has still not done anything wrong, which we'll get to later. So what happened then was Immortals took action, because obviously you're going to have to when that sort of thing comes out. And Noah Winston even says that he actually wanted to remove KNG, as I've kind of aligned there, is probably the appropriate action, right? But what happened was KNG's teammates, including the twins, begged for another chance. His coach as well, they begged, no, let him stay. He can be reformed. We can rehabilitate him. He'll apologize. They made all these comments. And so I'll read out the statement that Noah Winston said. He said, after seeing these statements on social media, I initially wanted to cut KNG from the team immediately. The other 4 players on the team, as well as the coach, Zach, convinced me to give him a second chance, to provide him a chance to apologize, reform, and rehabilitate himself. So in doing so, they decided that they were going to have a meeting with KNG and discuss suspension, basically. Like, what are they going to do and what's he going to do to kind of atone for what he's done? Now, they arranged this meeting and KNG did not turn up. This comes from Noah Winston himself. KNG did not turn up to the meeting. Because he did not turn up to the meeting, he was suspended from online play. Now, by the way, online play, it's not the end of the world. It's not LAN play. You would think, no problem, he just doesn't play the matches online, he gets unsuspended, now he gets judged on his future actions, right? Problem is, a day after the meeting, Immortals plays an online game against the very same CLG in the Epicenter qualifier, where they have to play potentially multiple best of threes. They play the first best of 3, and they lose without KNG in the lineup. Now, for some reason, at this point in time, according to KNG, Henny and Lucas, the twins, tell KNG that they've talked to Nick Fan, manager of the team, and that actually KNG's cleared from his suspension to play in the game. So KNG joins the game, plays. Now, after the match, Noah Winston tweets that he was not, in fact, removed from his suspension. And following this, Noah Winston and Immortals fire KNG from the team. Now, after he's fired, KNG makes a Facebook post, and this Facebook post is going to tell you a lot about this guy's mentality and what he has as his personal code of morals. Now, first of all, he denied that they were partying or drunk, which again, multiple sources have said that some of the Immortals players were. Now, by the way, none of them have said directly that it was KNG, so perhaps he was not, but some of the Immortals were in fact doing that. And from what I've heard, it's not necessarily partying in a very innocent sense either, like just staying up and being crazy, as you could probably imagine by the fact that it was impossible to get them out of bed. After they've gone for a nap, their manager can't get them out of bed, Dreamhack can't get them out of bed, their teammates can't get them out of bed. Now, it takes kind of a harsh, very intense type of partying to make you so tired you just will not get up in those circumstances. Now, funnily enough, when he says that they were about the partying and being drunk, that they were not, funnily enough, he says in Portuguese Brazilian, well, the Brazilian variant of Portuguese, which I will now attempt to speak, which I obviously do not speak. He says something along the lines of, Nós já estávamos sendo aprejados, and that actually, funnily enough, translates, if you hit the translate button on Facebook or use Google Translate, to we were already being stoned. I'm not Google Translate, mate. Now, obviously, by the way, he meant that in the sense of that they were already getting people criticizing them and saying things about them publicly. Presumably, that's the context that's supposed to mean. Now, in his Facebook post, he also even suggests that Dreamhack was somehow unfair for not letting them still start the first map. He says, we arrived in Arena 340. And for the first time, we delayed a championship. It was just a common sense for 5 minutes more of the rule time not to ruin the final. Which, first of all, doesn't add up with what Dreamhack said. They actually said that you had 5 minutes. Secondly, arriving in the arena is not good enough. So you arrived in the arena 10 minutes after the scheduled start time. Arrived, not arrived and was set up and were ready to go because you weren't. That wasn't until 3:56 p.m. according to Dreamhack. You were just coming to the arena 10 minutes after the scheduled start time. No, actually, it's not reasonable. You've already been given 10-15 minutes, actually. It's not reasonable that you should get 5 minutes extra. You know, there are rules, KNG, and you have to actually follow these rules, believe it or not, mate, as you're unfortunately having to learn the hard way in your life. Now, he also then called out Steel and Bolts, the two players who did turn up, as liars, basically, for doing a video interview where they said they couldn't find KNG, etc., and claims that they could have and that they knew where they were. He then calls out Noah Winston, his former owner, says that it was Steel that told KNG he was suspended, not anyone else in the org, and somehow it should have been Noah Winston directly talking to KNG, who knows why, then says that because Noah Winston himself didn't directly come to KNG and tell him that he was suspended, I mean, there are managers and players to do these things, that somehow that's dishonourable on Noah's part. So he impugns Noah Winston's honour and integrity as an owner, quite frankly. He also takes this moment to not apologise to FNS again. He does not apologise to FNS. And in fact, later after the fact, you'll find out again, to this day, he does not think he should apologise to FNX for anything he said or did. Now, after this, he's being fired from the team. Henny and Lucas, the twins, ask to be benched from Immortals. They say, we don't want to play in Immortals. Now, here's the thing. Noah Winston, at this point in time, could have utterly fucked all three of these players over. He could have said to them, because of your behaviour, now you're now denying me your labour, you've ruined a bunch of online leagues, you've let this guy come in and fuck up our reputation even more, and you're all refusing to apologise for it. You know what? If you want to leave, bear in mind if three of you leave, you take my major spot with you. Here's the deal. I'll let you be benched, in which case we won't have the major spot. I'll let you leave, but I'll only sell two of the three of you to any one team, so the major spot just disappears. I lose the major spot, but you lose the major spot. I personally, by the way, think that would have actually been a fair result. I think that's what Noah Winston should have done. But Noah Winston wanted to have good PR. So Noah Winston decided that he would sell all three of these players, in fact four, because FNX was still on the books in terms of contract, to a different squad and let them take the major spot. Now, bear in mind that this result, where Henning and Lucas benched themselves and KNG is fired, means that Immortals now absolutely wastes and eventually essentially loses their league spots. They lose their ECS and EPL spots. They have to just forfeit loads of the games. They lose them all, and they have no chance to make it to the finals. Remember, they'd been at EPL finals in the past. Now, Noah Winston allows four of them to be sold to 100 Thieves, a Call of Duty organisation that has a lot of money and hence was able to afford buyouts. Hence, The 100 Thieves signs what's called the Villa Party Mix. They add in Bit as well as FNX coming back to activity. They have the major spot. They're legends, so they don't need to qualify for the major. Always been their problem in the past, except for the time they got KNG this last time. And therefore, no qualification. All they have to do is get to the tournament and they can play in the major. Now, visa issue happened. We don't know who it was in the team. 100 Thieves claim that they had the best immigration lawyers working on it, but someone, at least one person, again, I don't know who it is, so I'm not implying it's KNG, someone has visa issues that mean they can't get into the United States of America, and hence the team is actually not in a position to be able to play, which actually to me suggests maybe more than one, but that's just speculation, and they end up being removed from the major. In this scenario, obviously that allowed Team Liquid to another spot opened up in the new Challenger stage. Team Liquid got that spot and moved through to the new Legend stage. Now then, after this, during the major itself, on January 21st, Fallen makes a tweet in which he says, every time I play E-League tournaments, it's the same hotel, by the way, the W Hotel in Atlanta. Very good hotel, fantastic hotel actually. It's the same hotel and problem. 01:08 a.m. and room next to me, smoking weed and music loud that vibrates my room. Now, in response to that, which is obviously a complaint, Brazilian players fairly famous for complaining about things on Twitter, especially about E-League, it seems, I decide to respond with some banter. And what I say is E-League gave you 100 Thieves room by mistake. And then I do my little beak face, smiley face, which implies it's banter, it's a joke. Now, by the way, because people tried to imply that somehow this was a direct insult to 100 Thieves and I'm calling them out or I'm baiting them, no, it was in no sense a bait for KNG or his team. It was banter, as you can see by the face. It's entirely harmless. In fact, I've even covered my back, because what is the implication there? Fallen says that he's in a room next to someone smoking weed and listening to loud music. I then say that E-League has given him, Fallen, 100 Thieves rooms by mistake. The joke there being that whether or not they would ever take part in both those activities, perhaps they wouldn't mind it as much, or perhaps E-League would think it was fitting for them to be in that particular room next to someone doing those things. I in no way ever implied that they were actually doing these things, or insinuated as much, quite frankly. That's a good example of where people will just lie about what are literally the facts. Now then, KNG decided to respond to my banter with a joke which held a homophobic implication towards me. He said, "Those shit you're talking about, are you sober? Or is it just after you make love to your boyfriend?" Now, the implication here, which is quite clear because it doesn't work as a joke or an insult otherwise, is that I am gay. And because it is assumed as a general consensus that I am in fact not gay, him implying I am gay is to be considered an insult, and perhaps even suggesting, if you go far enough down the track that normally works with in cultures that consider themselves very masculine and look down upon homosexuals, that somehow that makes me less of a man, that I would be gay and have a boyfriend and have had gay sex with him. Now that is an absolutely outrageous comment to make, especially in a context where I don't know KNG. I am not KNG's friend. This is not friendly banter between me and KNG. No, in no sense is it. And so, unsurprisingly, I called him out on that. He then tried to deny as much, imply it wasn't homophobic in any way, even though the insult doesn't work otherwise. Like, if he's not saying that to imply that, like, I'm gay and that being gay is bad, then how's it an insult? Like, what's the diss there if it's not that being gay is somehow something bad or inferior? That's the problem. He put himself in that scenario entirely. He could have even just replied, "Shut up," or "Don't imply things about my team," or "You're a terrible person." These would all be fine things. He could also have just been self-deprecating and bantered. Like, I actually even said myself, I thought a funny bit of banter he could have done was he could have been self-deprecating FNS style and been like, well, something like, maybe it was supposed to be our room because they knew that you wouldn't be at the major, so you wouldn't be able to complain about the noise that Brazilians make. That would have been a straight fire piece of banter. Didn't do any of that, of course. This is a guy with no self-awareness and no sense of humour, which is classic signs of an idiot, quite frankly. Now then, people tried to imply that I baited him here and I tried to wreck his career. Actually, and since people have lied about this and KNG's lied about this, I will now directly tell you something, which is that I contacted him privately. And what I said was, I sent him this DM right after his tweet. I said to him, if something becomes well known online, then it will continue to be referenced. Like your... oh, wait a second, actually. No, actually, I got it the wrong way around. I'm reading the wrong direction, right? Okay, here's what I said. I said to him, it's fun to joke, so we can keep going if you want, but this can have serious consequences for your career, so be careful what you say. Nobody wants to see you get in trouble with your organization. He then replies, what a joke this is that you mess with our image. Okay, FNS 2.0. No, that's interesting there. FNS 2.0. Again, he holds vitriol against FNS. Okay, FNS 2.0. I do not understand why you persecute us. Persecution complex of Brazilians coming out again there. We crossed the suitcase. Not really sure what that means, but we'll just go ahead and ignore it. I then replied, if something becomes well known online, then it will continue to be referenced, like you suggesting I am a racist, which is what he did. That's what happens. I'm making a joke. My point to you is that you can say whatever you want, but add gay stuff to the list with threats as something to avoid, because people in Europe or America are very sensitive about that topic, so it can get you in trouble. I'm actually basically telling this guy repeatedly, don't say things like that again, they're going to get you in trouble, and the overt hint here is, maybe apologize. People do not like that behavior, and they are going to be offended by this. I then personally, despite others in the scene calling for KNG, maybe he should be fired or he should be, again, given disciplinary treatment by his org. I actually did a tweet where I said, I hope no one does contact his org or the owner of his org, because let's not let a bit of banter, which I do think ultimately was in his intention, even though, yes, it had a horrible undertone there, which unfortunately comes from his culture. If you ever look into Brazilian culture and how they sometimes treat or speak about homosexual people, and admittedly, it's a very religious country as well, in a Christian sense, which obviously is not exactly the ideal religion for embracing homosexuality, is it? So I did try to imply that, yes, it was just banter, and so let's just leave it there, because I already have seen this guy fuck his own career up so much, and he is a good player, that I don't really want him, for the sake of fucking up his reply to me, to necessarily get fired. But you know what? He was fired. He was removed by 100 Thieves. Now, what did he do after this? This is where any last shred of sympathy I had for this guy disappears, because he writes a Facebook post again. What do you know? Back on social media again. Your domain, your battlefield, where it's always worked out so well for you in the past, right, KNG? Up he comes on Facebook. Now, he writes what he even terms himself essentially as a non-apology. He, in fact, explicitly so. He starts his Facebook post, first, I'd like to start by saying that this letter is not a retraction, even because I can't portray myself for something I didn't do. So he's not taking back what he said, he's not apologizing for what he said, and he actually thinks that he did not do the thing that people say he did, which was make a homophobic remark. He then suggests that Thorin, I have directly insinuated he uses drugs, didn't do that ever, and that he will sue me for defamation. Yes, the same guy who implied publicly that I am gay and that is a bad thing, and implied, and then attempted to make good on it, that he would kill another person over a tweet, is now claiming he's going to sue someone for defamation on Twitter. Now, if you read through this Facebook post, it's very telling about KNG and what a childish mentality he has, because it's all about himself and how he's a victim and about his feelings and what he was feeling at all points in time, even when he's the one making the aggressive, insulting and unacceptable remarks and behavior. It's always about him. There's never any apology to me. He doesn't apologize for me even for the homophobic remark. He doesn't apologize to FNS even though he has another opportunity to. He doesn't apologize to 100 Thieves for now making himself get cut and fucking up their squad even more that they've paid massive amounts of money for. In fact, he even then, when I had said on Twitter, the difference between me and him was that I apologized when I do something wrong, implying when I made the monkey joke about luminosity, and I then apologized in their native language on Twitter, tagging them all in, saying I'm sorry for this behavior. Now, I said, I apologized for it. You did not. He then even said on Twitter that he wasn't going to apologize, because why would he apologize to the one that made him feel bad for free, implying that, again, it's FNS that's the aggressor, and he is the victim, even though he said he'll kill FNS, and that, if anything, it's FNS should apologize to him, and he should never have to apologize to FNS. So you really see what a childlike mentality this guy has, and what an imbecile he is, quite frankly. Like, it doesn't matter how many fucking life ropes you throw this guy, or life preservers. He just won't grab onto them. He just keeps flailing around and drowning in the fucking water. So let's run through a little timeline, shall we? So an Immortals player is seen drinking before the major final. Immortals is late to their CLG match, per Ryu. Immortals is then late to the first map of the final, almost late for the second map of the final, so they forfeit the first map, play the second map, it's shit, they've ruined the event for Dreamhack. He then threatens to kill FNS because of a joke. He refuses to apologise, to this day refuses to apologise, is suspended, doesn't honour his suspension, plays after only one match out of suspension, and then, bearing in mind, he only even got the suspension and wasn't fired because his team had already gone out on a limb and begged for clemency from him, gets fired, immediately after being fired, accuses his two former teammates of lying, the ones that never did anything, calls out his former owner, who is about to do him a favour and not put him in contract prison and instead sell him to a big org for lots of money and a great salary so he can play in the fucking major after costing Immortals that major spot. He then replies in an outlandish manner, in an over-the-top manner, to a joke that was not directed to him, did not tag him, did not even reference him by name, and he was not even the key vehicle of the joke. Because again, I've never claimed that he was out partying personally. He then refuses to apologise for that homophobic remark. He says he didn't do anything wrong, fucking didn't do nothing KNG over here. He's the victim as usual. He then, I guess fucking KNG lives matter, right? He then gets fired, blames me yet again, says he will sue me. So let's just run through this. Who's he harmed here? So he harmed Immortals' chances to win Dreamhack Montreal. He harmed the fans' ability to watch a full best-of-3 final at Dreamhack Montreal. He harmed Dreamhack Montreal's final itself. So the Dreamhack organisation has a joke final. He harmed Immortals because they had to basically forfeit their two online leagues, ECS and EPL. He harmed Immortals in terms of the qualifying for Epicenter by not being available for the matches by not having been suspended in the first place. He then harms Immortals because they lose their major spot. And they also have no time or opportunity to get another team to replace them. He then harmed Team Liquid because when they picked up Steel, they couldn't use Steel. He harmed SK Gaming because SK Gaming couldn't pick up Bolts, cost them a major potentially. Admittedly, those two are indirect. I don't necessarily blame him directly for those. He then harmed Immortals due to getting fired after they spent loads of money on him, haven't even got a major out of him, never even played a motherfucking match for the 100 Thieves team. The team actually, after this, ends up getting cut entirely because this was probably the last fucking straw for this org. Like, what the fuck's going on here? Now this guy's doing this after you've already cost us the major. At least shut the fuck up until you play a match for us. You know what? My summation after all this is fuck this guy. Fuck everything he's about. He's not a good guy. He's someone who has said he'll kill someone, tried to act on it, never apologised, harmed everyone around him in the scene that he has touched and come in contact with in an 8-month span in the scene, and then has no remorse for any of it, still thinks he is the victim and that everyone else is treating him unfairly and doesn't feel the need to apologise because he thinks he's done nothing wrong. Unbelievable. Now, yes, this guy was a wasted talent, but you know what? He was also fairly old for a player. So, as a result, not that likely he would have changed and got much better. It's also not that likely he would change as a person, quite frankly. He's someone who bites the hand that feeds him. He refuses to change because he doesn't see any of this as his problem. Look at the way he dealt with the Immortals' internal stuff. It seems like either the people he views as the grasses, like Bolts and Steel, because they actually came out publicly and said they couldn't find them, he either blames them or he blames Noah Winston. That's it. It seems like within their org, apparently blame just passes through all Brazilian people who are loyal to them. They can never be to blame, including themselves, and just goes to the first non-Brazilian person, and then that person takes all the blame for some reason. In some utterly moronic, like, serial chain of events. It's like, if this one thing hadn't happened, the rest couldn't have happened. How would you fucking know? You guys can fuck everything up no matter what, it seems. So you know what? Good riddance, KNG.